All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to welcome you today. Again, our guest will be with us shortly, but I wanted to give you a bit of context about this Solar in Climate Founder Series. This is actually number 2, and I'll share with you, we have other already lined up. So I'm really excited to see the traction for this type of event. We're starting from the perspective that there is so many transferable skills that Xooglers have and we can bring to climate. But sometimes it's not obvious what's the path. Do you need to be a scientist? I know we had a lot of questions, a lot of people who were curious about it, and also a lot of founders who wanted to start building their team. So we were thinking this series can be a really good place for people to share their journey, talk about practical insights, and then build on each other. So my goal is really to make something really candid where we can learn a little bit of the behind the scene, not what you hear in any other podcasts or interviews. And I also want to talk about a bit of product market fit and scaling. We know for early stage startups in climate, the scaling and growth is really critical. Want to make sure that the economic model, marketing, and the sales are all aligned. So I figured that would be really interesting to hear from these founders how they think about growth. So that's a bit of the insights, and really offline, we've been building this fabulous, I think, community. It's growing every day. So I'm Veronique. I'm the founder of Maison Lafargue. We are a boutique marketing agency helping early stage startups grow, create their branding and positioning. And I'm also a marketing advisor and an instructor on Maven. So I have a class. And then Mark Rosensmith, who's actually at the RE Plus Energy Conference today, is also the founder of CO Trash Power, was the key member who started all of that. So very grateful for Mark's leadership and presence. We're doing a lot of activities. If you haven't been to any of them, I highly encourage you. We have monthly welcome call where we get a few people, we introduce each other, we make connections. Come, and you can come multiple times. It's also fine if you want to meet the new members. So it's happening at the beginning of every month. The next one is October 1st. There's a group organizing activities. Mark will send a message on the WhatsApp group, I think this week, about Climate Week in New York. And we also have some communication about Climate Week LA. All of them are happening in the next few weeks. So pretty exciting. And for this series, we have also a great lineup. So again, coming from New York, we'll hear from Brendan Hermelin. He's the CEO and founder of Talo Labs. And they do also really interesting thing with direct air capture, in buildings, starting with New York, with really cool partnerships. And then we'll have Paul Lumber, who's the founder and CEO at Quilt. And they're working on heat pumps and heating and cooling system for the house, beautifully designed with a lot of the Nest and Tesla, Google DNA. It's very pretty. So highly encouraged. The links are always very easy to remember. Please register and we'll send you the recording if you can't make it live. I assume most of the people here who are part of the Xoogler community, you are on the Substack. That's where obviously the newsletter is sharing a lot of information. If you're not, I'll share that deck around and you can make sure you subscribe. On the Xoogler in Climate, specifically, we have a YouTube channel, which got a little revamp, so you can easily find the videos. We have this video, but we also have some from our past events, interviews, but also some of the panels we hosted at SF Climate Week back in April. And also keeping our LinkedIn page pretty up to date with news and announcements. So feel free to follow the page and reshare when you see announcements that you think are relevant to you or some of your friends. We've created a list of resources and we're updating it almost every day. There's a lot coming our way and everybody can really contribute to this one. So I'm excited. It's becoming our little repository of articles and job board. So for anybody who's new, it's usually a good starting point. And we've created a directory, still low tech, it's on a deck, but we want everybody to put their little photo and tell us a bit about themselves and how the community can help them. All right, now is the time where I check if I have news from Peter. And Peter, you're here. Wonderful. How are you doing? Everything okay?
I'm great. Thank you.
Perfect.
Delighted to be here. And yeah, there's a little earthquake this morning in Southern California, and it was actually on the ground in an airplane, and they said they had to go check the runway to make sure it wasn't affected by the earthquake. So a little delay, but I'm here.
Okay, so Peter, we did a little intro from people in the chat, and we discussed our favorite buildings, so we're already in the mood. But everybody, this is Peter. So excited to have him today. He brings a lot of expertise in the world of carbon-free energy, so we're going to talk a lot about that. Today in his position of CEO of Lumen Energy, with background, you started, I think, at the Rocky Mountain Institute, work at Bloom Energy on product management, and most recently Tapestry at Google X. So whole overview, I think, of 2 decades of that industry. And you live in San Francisco, just realized with your 3 daughters. So glad to know a little bit about you also personally. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing here, making sure the recording is good. And I would love to jump right in if you're ready, especially hearing about your transition, right? There's a lot of coherence in your background, obviously, with energy, but how did you decide to leave Google, start your own company, and how was the transition really?
I am deeply passionate about finding ways to just rapidly decarbonize our whole energy system, and the way, I'll give you the why behind it. I think I had the fortune of studying engineering and art as when I was in college, and I think when people have more kind of stable societies, or people are able to pursue their dreams in the next kind of Beethoven or the next Bach, those are people that move me. But you might have artists or people that move you. I study sculpture, and so I think having stability politically and in societally is really critical to sort of reveal the highest and greatest expressions of people. So climate change makes that hard, and we already sort of see that playing out in different places. And I think going from a world that was 6 billion people to 9 billion people by mid-century, you sort of just look at the GDP growth or sort of energy per capita, it really goes up as GDP rises. And so I'm deeply committed to finding ways to say, how do you actually allow that energy use to increase, but have the carbon impact go down? And those of you who have looked at the math, it's bracing math. It is bracing math. It requires essentially a reimagining and a transition of infrastructure. What's been called the energy transition. There are other aspects of climate which we can get into as well, but to talk to energy, which is on the order of 75% of CO2 emissions globally, it's remaking and replacing old infrastructure with new infrastructure on a timeline that is faster than that typically happens. So, for instance, like when refrigerators came along, it still took many decades for those to get used. And you would think, of course, everyone would want one instantly, but it just penetration of new technologies, that's, infrastructure takes time. So how I started Lumen was I saw this picture at night at my desk at Google X, and I was working on Tapestry, and I'm happy to share how myself and someone else co-founded that project and got that off the ground within Google X. But I was looking at all the ways to, how do you go rapidly cut carbon? And I will just say, if you all have kind of surveyed this space, you've probably seen there are a lot of things that are really cool. And there are so many different cool technologies. And I will say there is something here in this space for everyone, which is awesome. I mean, there's whole worlds in biology and in material science. I mean, energy, we could go in agriculture. There's sort of, there's something here for everyone. But specifically in energy even, and in the context of Google X, there are a lot of things that were really, really cool, like flying wind turbines, Makani, which I worked on in some of the early days there, floating solar, non-lithium ion batteries, geothermal that spun out. But the second question is like, it can't just be cool. If you want it to scale, it's got to be cost effective. And that has been a challenging test for a lot of technologies. And being able to be like, the goal in a way is to be boring. It's like to be like underground pipes. What I mean is like, no one ever thinks about underground pipes because they're everywhere. And that's actually what you want to get to with the mass deployment of this infrastructure that powers our lives. Now, in the Google X context, it probably sounds kind of boring to say that, but I'm saying like that is the end goal if you want impact, right? And so you sort of peel that back, you're like, well, okay, to do that, this is capital infrastructure. And to have it be mass deployed quickly and be cost effective, it needs to be financed. That means bankers who don't really care about like cool tech talks at Google, they want to put lots of money behind it, debt, and they want to know they're going to get paid back, which means coming back to the technology, it's got to work and be proven and cost effective. So that quickly narrows you down to a set of things. And to come back to the sunroof data set, it was like, okay, I see this picture. And in fact, I'll pull it up for everyone. I have a little, an image that is motivating to me. It's an image of all the buildings in, all across the US and the world, where you can start to see the solar resource, essentially the free energy that's hitting these buildings all the time. And I looked at this and I was like, oh yeah, isn't solar already figured out? Like that's scaling, right? Residential, like heard about that. And I started looking, I was like, wait, a lot of these buildings are commercial. They use about 40% of the electricity in the US. There's 6 million of them. And wow, there's only about 3 or 4% penetration of solar across these rooftops. Why aren't real estate owners doing this? So I fell in love with that question. And I went to talk to real estate owners. And they said, look, sounds cool. Yes, we very much like making new net operating income in their parlance, or new cash flow. We want it to be a good investment. And green is more and more important to us, from our investors, from our tenants, regulators. But it's got to be simple. You got to tell me, Peter, right away, like, what can I make on this property? And here's my address list. Like, what's the value of doing solar batteries, this asset? Just tell me the number. And what I learned is, going deeper into that problem, is it's just like chasing a fugitive in the night. Like, it is so hard to get to that answer for people. And that's why most people give up, is it has historically been this very fragmented and just legitimately very complicated question, which I'm happy to go into. That is a data-rich question, just to give someone a simple answer. What's this worth to me? So that's what we set out to do at Lumen Energy, and I'll share more about how we do that, today. But flash forward, we work some of the largest commercial real estate owners in the country to help them figure out where they can go sensibly deploy clean energy, cut carbon, and do it profitably. And that, we believe, is going to be just the biggest pull and the biggest force to kind of quickly cheat this sort of multi-decade transition, and just shine a spotlight on where it is wildly economic to cut carbon.
Wonderful. I want to follow up on the industry trends, because I think it's so important for us to understand the mega trends powering this change. Because you talk about, obviously, there's going to be free energy, so there's probably a cost component. We know there's decarbonization happening, and also heard you in a different interview talking about the value of assets, right? That those property owners, they have to make sure all the time the value of their asset is not going down because their carbon emissions are so bad. Helping everybody who may not be an expert in that space, what do you think are the biggest trends driving also the change? Is it behavior or beliefs from these building owners? Is it a lot of regulation? You mentioned data too, so I'm sure the technology is playing. Can you help us really understand how the combination make it the right moment, probably, for you to start really changing that, 35% of greenhouse emission coming from building, and how we can address it?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you touched on the last part. I'll just say something about that. When you look at the data of just where are emissions coming from, you start to see buildings are this, many double digit. They're on the order of 35% of greenhouse gas emissions. You're like, okay, geez, and buildings are gonna be around. They persist. Most of the buildings you even see in this picture just will be here in the year 2050, or kind of pick your net zero threshold. So there is this real, very big, chunky problem, and one I think that's really been, my read has been, it's not that it's been overlooked, it's just been perceived as very, very difficult. And I'm happy to go into the why and what we've seen. I think the first thing is commercial buildings in particular, they're, it's often said, every building's a snowflake. They're unique and they have different shapes and sizes. Those are kind of the obvious things you might think of. They also have different usage inside the building. So we're getting this, this picture I put up, this sunroof picture, we're getting the outside the building, just the kind of raw, free energy that's hitting them. But to answer the economic question, you have to answer, many more pieces of the puzzle and pull them together. And one is, what is the energy usage at that building? Not just in annual aggregate, but what is the signature? Think of it like we sometimes call it the energy DNA. Like, what's the fingerprint of usage? And it's a time series value, set of values that, hourly, annual, sort of 8760 data points in the industry parlance. And that the reason that usage pattern is so important is because to get to the economic answer, you have to say, what electricity am I displacing from the utility? Because the local utility sets the baseline of cost against which you evaluate solar, batteries, heat pumps, EV charging, microfusion reactors tomorrow, whatever it is. Someone's going to say, wait, what is my baseline today, Peter, against that? So historically, it's been really tricky to go figure that out because, come back to my example, talk to a real estate owner and they say, hey, Peter, this sounds cool. I love, savings and green, but I'm going to go back to real estate now. You got to be able to have an answer for them. And historically, it's been a long custom engineering consulting process, many weeks and months for one building. And the state of the art, which some of our early customers showed us, is, kind of a 4-inch binder, and it's a consulting report that literally has people with a map of their building and a highlighter over it on areas of the roof. They're like, yeah, you should put solar here, and that's how much it costs, gross cost. So the building owner says, look, I don't know if that's the right size. What about my tax impacts? I heard about these policies. What about my utility rates? It leaves many questions unanswered. And so again, the state of the world was people do nothing. So I will just say one more thing. I know I love the mix of talents within my fellow Zuglers it's extraordinary, and I'd say the data richness and data complexity of this problem. I had 20 years in the field. I did not know how complicated it was going to be. It is staggeringly complex. So that's a way to say that there is a very rich data problem here that I would just say as an industry, we are still at the beginning of scratching. And so I'm happy to talk more about that, but
yeah, no, and I was thinking the same. I'm sure a lot of Googler and Googler are really excited about hearing that and a very complex data-driven problem. But that leads me to, with such a big problem, can you walk us through how you design your platform and your offer? And did you have to pivot along the way? Because it's definitely super complex. And I know your platform is about selecting, acting, shining, really like the arc you have here. But yeah, can you walk us through the design process and how you found this product market fit?
Sure. Let's see. We did. I say there were some early pivots, and I'll share with you kind of our own journey. So myself and my there was kind of like a V-1, which was, in Tapestry, when I put together, I spent a lot of time with utilities, and I saw, it was like, these utilities are going to get hit with this freight train of all these distributed energy devices, solar batteries, thermostats, EVs. It's, multiple orders of magnitude higher of devices at the end of the grid that they do not have the systems to deal with. And it's really just been kind of in my opinion, people are aware of it, but it's such an overwhelming topic that the data system's not there. And that really led to the sort of creation of Tapestry. But I first went to utilities and said, you're going to get hit with all this solar and batteries. It's just going to be cheaper and people are going to go do this. Wouldn't you want to, instead of having end users, homeowners and building owners, just solve for those systems for their benefit counter to yours? Wouldn't you want to kind of have a hand in designing those systems and making sure, let's say that like they're west facing solar systems, so that they're producing electricity, say in California, in the afternoon and as much as you can, where it would be beneficial. And I went to one of the most thought-leading utilities that's in the Bay Area, and had 3 or 4 meetings, and I was like, great, we're on it. This is awesome. They seem really excited. And then they didn't call me back. Just crickets. So, and I hold on that moment for a while, because I know coming from Google, it is a blessing and a curse. And I want to highlight this for everyone. Being inside of the womb of probably the greatest monopoly of our lifetime can make it challenging to go not get a phone call back. As a Googler, you show up with the Google X, Google business card, everyone will take your call. And then, you quickly get sort of out of that. And then, you really get intense focus on what is going to be valuable to other people, and where there's going to be the old Y Combinator phrase, make something people want. But that was, kind of V0 -1. Then I met my co-founder, Dave Cohen. He was very early at Stripe, had built many fintech products. And we said, well, look, why don't we go to building owners? If we have this ability to remotely price the building, and we also heard from the early building owners that they wanted to, they just wanted an answer, and they wanted it turned into dollars. They did not want to get into utility tariff complexity or solar tilt complexity, none of that. They just want it turned into dollars. And so we said, what if we just go direct to building owners and said, look, we'll pay you cash to put solar on your roof. And we set out to do that, and we picked a city. We picked Hayward, California, and we got dumb lucky, because Hayward, California had one of the best city data sets of just like, where are the buildings, who owns the buildings, how big are they? That was uncommon at the time. And we had a number of data science grad students from Stanford and Berkeley that joined us. This is very, very early days, very scrappy, but they were getting some really good applied experience. And we modeled every building in the city and priced every building and said, if you put solar on this, what would the value be? And we turned that back into a cash offer. And then we made postcards where we mass produced postcards that were personalized to each building owner, had a picture of their building, and then the cash value specific to that building, and we said we would pay them. It all made sense to us. And people got these postcards and they're just like, what is this? Like, who is this company? I don't know. I mean, this just sounds like a scam. People wrote into our landing page, and they said, like, stop flying helicopters over my building. You just like paint the picture of the world of it. And then COVID hit, and small business owners had much, much bigger problems than finding ways to add, 20 or 30 grand or figure out, solar and savings. So we got sort of hit with that first wave of challenge. And then fortunately at the time, we were approached by some large commercial real estate owners who said, look, I don't have one building, I have 300 buildings, and they're all across the country. And they're different shapes and sizes, and they're different uses. They're multifamily, office, industrial. And I want to plan. No one can help me figure out where I should go deploy solar and batteries across all these properties. And we naively said, yep, we can go do that. That's actually what we designed our software for. We're only in California today, but we built all the building blocks to acquire the data sets to go national. And we did that, and we started to scale up there, and that we started to see there was this pattern emerging in the commercial real estate and also the corporate space of just this latent need of people saying they wanted to decarbonize. And there was a lot of work on, call it ESG dashboards, and that's a whole industry in itself. But then there was a wave of people who said, no, we actually want to go cut carbon, and we want to do it profitably, and no one can tell us how to go do that. And that's really where we've landed.
Very cool. So I think you answered my question a little bit also on go-to-market, right? Pivoting from going to the utilities to going to the biggest industrial and commercial owners. Is that the ongoing go-to-market? Are you starting with these flagship customers and then expanding? Can you tell us a bit more?
Sure. Yes, today we work with some of the largest commercial real estate owners in the world, and with their US properties to start. To give you a sense, someone will have 1,450 properties, others have 3,300, other have 8,000. And, you know, just imagine there's like a person or 2 or 3 people who someone else said somewhere else, like we're going to cut carbon by 40% by 2030, or we're going to be net zero by 2040. And then someone has to go figure out what to do about that. And just to take an example with, let's say, you know, a building owner with 1,400 properties, you might see these goals of net zero by 2040. And, you know, just do some napkin math. 1,400-ish properties, 2040, kind of sounds far away in our heads, but you're like, oh wait, that's like 15, 16 years away. And okay, like, you're like, okay, you're going to zero out carbon on 93 buildings a year, every year from now until 2040 to get to zero, like to land that plane at zero at 2040. That's not happening. Just state of the world, that is like, we are really far from that happening. The grid is very slowly decarbonizing. It's heterogeneous in different places. There's a long glide path, but that's not intersecting at 2040. So we do find building owners have said, look, we want to do this systematically, but we get proposals all the time. People hit up our inbox in New Jersey or California, but we don't know where the best place is to go. And we want to start with a plan that's holistic, and we want to make sure we're making a good decision. And so that's really where we start today with our software. And we've built the ability to just instantly underwrite every property against many financing types. So it helps people who are in this position of having an outcome of wanting to cut carbon and do it profitably and sensibly to look at all the options just right away in one shot. And I'm happy to share where it goes from there, but that's where we start.
Yeah, and I want to encourage everybody, if you have questions, put them in the chat so I don't miss them along the way. I think along this line, what I was curious, you mentioned a lot of the decarbonization goals. Are they self-imposed, or do you see a lot of regulations also accelerating those goals?
It's a mix. And it's for different reasons for different companies. I will share with you, let's see. Some companies have sustainability goals where it's a corporate initiative and a corporate commitment. Others where it's been kind of you know, people say, look, the boardroom reads the Wall Street Journal and says, look, I get that solar is cheaper and batteries make sense, and I see the news, like this is a thing, and this is going to be important in the future, and we should take advantage of it. Others, it's sporadic and like tenant driven. The landlords who own properties, who, let's say companies like Google or other, you know, big tech firms, or just, you know, really most of the Fortune 500 has carbon reduction goals. The building owners just get these episodic requests like, hey, they're like, the tenant will be like, hey, I'm going to go put solar, I'm going to go decarbonize the building. And the landlord's like, what? I own the building. No, you can't go do that, but I should get smart about this because you're my customer, the tenant. And so that's just the kind of hairball of this little dust storm, like that's just playing out all across commercial real estate owners in different ways. So that's what we see today. And I'll just say one last thing is, again, to sort of zoom out, there are a lot of ways to go cut carbon. Many of them are very, very cool. Many of them are very expensive. And so I think, as an aside, I think carbon removal as a personal citizen, I think we should do more of it. I think we should have done more of it a long time ago. And I'm really glad there's lots of R&D and startups and a vibrant ecosystem there. But just to highlight, that carbon removal will go from thousands of dollars a ton to $500 a ton to maybe $100 a ton. And that's, you know, Google's a buyer of carbon removal in the future. But all of that will always sort of cliff off at a positive dollars per ton. It will be a net cost. There's a whole different world of things which are profitable to cut carbon. And so that has been my personal focus, is let's cut all of the friction using software to mass deploy capital into things that are already economic.
I want to talk about capital, and I was just checking. I think you say your team, you have software, data science, clean energy deployment, real estate, and finance type of skills. But but understanding what's the implication, and also from your own investors, like, do you have to involve some of your own cash for these activities? Do you work with partners? Like, can you help us understand how your team is structured, the skills, because we're talking a lot about transferable skills, and what you need to be successful in that complex ecosystem?
Yes. Let's see. I think a general observation is there are, and someone else said this to me, and I'm repeating it and sort of, hacking it, is that where there are a lot of opportunities is at the seams of different fields of knowledge and adjacent industries. And so I think where Lumen sits is we're combining energy technology understanding, and then financial software, and then real estate together. And so these are different fields that kind of, often exist a little separately. And so that's in terms of skill sets. Most of our team has software engineering and data science. We do have people who have deep backgrounds in project finance, like with an investment banking background, because the way to go actually deploy this stuff is it has to be financed. And I think as an important detail in this is, you all might have followed the Inflation Reduction Act and many sort of tax credits out there, which are great to have and great catalysts. When you get into those, they get complicated. It is complicated tax finance. And so having a competency in that area is really important to sort of set that up. Now, to your question about how does the money go? Lumen is not deploying the capital to go fund these clean energy projects. There are plenty of very talented, well-financed, typically private equity-backed companies, though also some utilities now, who say, look, I want to go fund solar and battery projects if it meets this criteria. So what we do as a company is we go to those investors and project financiers and developers, and we say, tell us your sweet spot. Like, tell us your buy box, as we call it. Like, if we bring you something that looks like this, like a big flat rooftop that has a few megawatts of solar potential and battery, maybe EV charging potential future, would you want to finance that project? And if you did, what would be your terms? And they say, great, if you bring it and it looks like that, yes, we want that. And then we, through our software, underwrite all these buildings, thousands and thousands of them, and say which ones are A, a good fit that meet that criteria, and B, where there's a building owner or a tenant who says, yes, I want to cut carbon and make money and go do this. And we become this digital matchmaker, which is effectively our business model, which is a marketplace.
Yeah, definitely a big marketplace. So no more postcards in the mail, I guess, from a marketing or sales strategy.
Well, not today. The postcard machine is not running right now. But I think I will say that you think of commercial buildings, we use those two words, and you might sort of frame up in your mind like one thing. It is just have a whole root tree of a distribution of many different types. There are many different animals in the zoo, so to speak. There, multifamily has different metering types. Industrial buildings, based on where they're based, have different usage patterns. Office buildings are different again, self-storage. One of the things we found when we were working in Hayward, California, is we sent a postcard to someone and we said, hey, you have a big flat roof, and we think this makes sense. And we contacted them and they said, look, I have cement garden gnomes being stored in this. Like, there's no electricity use. And another building would have, maybe, a pizza factory or, even a data center in it. So figuring that out is, part of what we do, is say, where is the electricity consumption, married with the building, married with other financial information, to really make it an offer that makes sense for the building owner.
So a lot of segmentation, I guess, required in your outcome.
Yes.
In the first episode of our series on Founder, we discussed with Cynthia the time she's spending on personal branding and making connections or getting awards versus the time as a founder building the company. I was curious, what's your perspective? How do you think about building your personal brand, or at that stage of the company, you're more in the scale up phase? Like, what kind of lever are you using? I think people want to understand also how you grow with such complexity.
Let's see. Well, I think it's really important. I mean, you know the value of marketing, getting the word out. I think my personal take is I try to be, you know, measured in saying like really want it to be sort of, high impact communications and really have something to say that's valuable. So at least that's the kind of lens I try to put through for myself. There are different approaches that people have. I think really the best marketing, especially in this space, but in the kind of commercial real estate and corporate real estate, is just, hey, someone else like you did it. Like there's a case study, and that because I will, the psychological safety that exists at Google and Google X, in my own experience, is very high, I think, in general. And everyone's had their own experience, but I'll just say, in general, hey, bring me your new idea, come up with something crazy. Oh, 10x your craziness, like bring it. When you sort of get out of that environment, you realize that actually isn't how, in my experience, most of corporate America operates. And so people are really, you got to help people think through and have it be something that is safe for them, and even, a great victory for them and their own organization and their career. So I say that because I think case studies make it safe to do something new. And so that comes back to where do I spend my time as an early stage founder? It's working on the product and working on the company and the team and working just as closely with customers as possible to really understand the problem through their lens, their actual words. I'll say one more thing. There's the comment of like language market fit, which is actually kind of one of the first things I think you can do to try to really nail that, even almost sort of pre-product at the kind of landing page and Figma level. And I encourage everyone, if you're working on something new, to really start there. Like, what are the words your target customers would actually use to describe the thing that you do?
I love that you're saying that. And I think there's a lot of great resources in first round review about language market fit and even PMF stages. Another question I hear a lot from founders too, sometimes maybe a little scared about, how do I get all these insights from customer? And even, do we need to record or call? So I'm curious, how did you get these insights that helped you up to now to get these language market fit and different insights and segmentation? Did you just call people? Did you have introduction? Like, what was the strategy?
Set a goal of 100 conversations every 2 weeks or something like that. I mean, just sort of set a quantitative goal of just getting the reps is one good practice. A second, and this is maybe to your tactical question, is recording calls is great. Make sure that it works for people to do that. And you just you get in, you just build up your own kind of data set. You're training your own neural net to just find out like, what are the patterns here, and then making sure you reserve time to go look back and assess. And good practice is kind of like every Friday afternoon, just go look through the notes and say like, what is sticking out here? What did I learn this week? So that's something that I sometimes I'm saying this, reminding myself to do that. I get in sometimes in a blur by the end of the week, but that is certainly at that stage. I do think a piece of advice, if I could say it to my kind of former self, but in case it's valuable to all of you, is just like, when you're at those early stages, it can be almost so overwhelming of like, I could do all the things. How do I even prioritize? Literally just making up rules like that for yourself can help sort of enforce a little bit of structure of just get in front of people and number of conversations per week.
I love that. You just alluded to building your own engine, or do you use some generic AI tool to synthesize those conversations and see patterns?
No, there's a ton out there. today, but I think this maybe kind of veers into company culture now. We have a Slack channel, Voice of Customer, and just encourage people to post liberally on that so that it's just broadcast to the whole company all the time. And just verbatim, here are the words that people said, and here's a link to the conversation. Yeah, and that it starts to distill.
Wonderful. I think, yeah, that's highly motivating when you see these early feedback, and very cool. Yeah, we're gonna phase that. I want to keep a few minutes for questions, but curious about your next growth stage. We didn't talk about investors. I know you're working with Lower Carbon Capital. We had them on a panel at SF Climate Week with Stuart and other people, but just curious how you find this feed also with your investors, and what's the next step of growth for you from an investment perspective?
Sure. Maybe I'll say two things about that. The great news is, fortunately for communities like this one, there are a tremendous number of resources that I don't know if they existed, or maybe I just didn't personally know about them. But if you want to go both learn about the ecosystem, but then also if you really feel like you're onto something and you think you want to speak with VCs, they're actually just lists of climate tech VCs and people that are really interested in the space and have a lot of good experience. And I think, there's the old sort of paradigm of the kind of author and the editor, meaning like the founding team being the sort of author group and the venture community being the editor. And to sort of just use that, I encourage you all, if you want to explore something, talk to people early, because the venture community has, investors have that's all they do all day long is look at all kinds of different pitch ideas. So they have an incredible resource set. They may not see and understand the thing that you're working on now or yet, but it's a great way to get feedback. In my case, it just started to have early conversations when we started to get growth, and we knew that we knew this was not going to be kind of a bootstrap thing. I mean, the software and data science isn't very involved. And so we said, this is, going to be a venture funded business. And I think perhaps more importantly, like, the scale of the problem is so big that we want to go make sure we're on a ramp to go be able to make a big dent. So hope that helps. And then I think maybe you asked one other question around what's our next stage of growth. Well, we're growing with our existing customers, and there are a number of them who are very, very careful with their marketing, which is to say that we are sort of quietly working with them. But as these engagements advance, we'll look to share more about that. I will also say that I think over time, my aspiration, you all might have seen this in other industries, where what was really complicated and hard and bespoke as a process, you start to chip away at it, and you start to just build increasing automation, and more that becomes the kind of thing that can just be out there in the world. And I think that's something that is probably a next phase for us.
Maybe last question, any other suggestion for people who haven't yet joined the climate tech community? Any learning, any tips?
There's the old sort of like, the best time to start was yesterday, or put another way was, in the climate challenge. I think someone who's an inspiration of mine, a guy named Amory Lovins, and I think he got this even from someone else, but sort of we have just enough time starting now. And I think that I'll leave you with a story, which is something I think about a lot. If you all have ever been to Yosemite, you've seen the walk through the valley, or you've at least seen pictures of El Capitan, the couple 1,000-foot granite face. And I suspect for most of human history, as people looked at that, it was probably laughably absurd to think that someone could climb it. It's just this massive granite face. And then what happened is, in the 50s, there was a guy named Warren Harding who who went up it with rope and wool and a hammer and nails and literally pounded in the rock for weeks and weeks and made his way up. And then someone said, wow, oh, that can be done. And let's see if we can do a little faster than 3 weeks. And that progressed over time. And people started to do it in, a week, and then a few days, and then a day. And then if you all ever saw the movie Free Solo, and I think in the 2014 it was climbed, in about, I think, 2.5 hours with no gear by one person, Alex Honnold. And I share that story because there actually was very little technology involved in that. Maybe the shoes got a little bit better. Maybe being able to video, a scene, help someone learn, but it's primarily, to me, is a feat of moving the kind of the ceiling or the Overton window, or like what is possible in the perception of what people think is possible. And I think what's happening with all the interest in climate tech is there is what I like to say is like the compounding of the adjacent possible. It's like what is right there next to us, but not yet real. Like we're moving very quickly in the direction of first evaluating all these different solutions, and we keep finding things that work. I'll just share with you that, looking at the Bloomberg New Energy Finance report on batteries, coming out of China, the cost reduction in the last 12 months of LFP batteries was 44%, which just boggles my mind that that's true. And I think there are many places to be very excited. So I'll just say there's something here for everyone, and if you want to get started, do it now.
Love it. I love the El Capitan analogy. I think it's a beautiful one. Opening up to anybody has a question for Peter. Don't be shy. Just checking the chat. I think we covered so much ground. Brian,
I got a question. It's not it's specifically related to Lumen. Super excited about the sunroof shout out, because I helped Carl go from like a 20% project to like a thing out in the world when I was at Creative Lab. And some of the things that we did in experience design, I was wondering if they would be applicable to your business. You mentioned that interesting relationship between tenant and owner. Wondering if you like deliver any information, dossiers, packets, etc., to the tenant for them to sort of be your first line sales representative to the building owner. If that was something that you had explored, because that was something that we spoke about when we were doing design for sunroof. And then the other thing was, obviously sunroof was like a big like self-serve tool. And checking out your website really quickly, was curious if that was a thing that you could borrow and implement on your own, that any sort of like building owner or portfolio owner could quickly input their address in and sort of get like a finger in the wind litmus test for, how much it would cost and how much it could save. And if that's something that could be useful, or if something that you explored and decided it wasn't worth doing for reasons X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, and that's cool. You work to get sort of sunroof off the ground. I'll say in the world of deploying clean energy at buildings, residential and commercial are two different branches, which are not only different in the underlying data and the underwriting of how you actually go answer this question, but very, very different, customer profiles and how people think about it. Residential, mostly homeowner driven, and, surprisingly, still a lot of the sort of most effective sort of sales methods are like door-to-door sales. And so I hold that out there to say that there's a lot that I think that you can just like, give me a simple, close enough version, red, yellow, green, like that actually works with homeowners. Like, okay, I'll go take the next step. For commercial real estate owners, corporates, it's not enough. It needs to be very, very rigorous. It needs to be like a CFO ready financial model. And that's been really hard to go do. And so I think you're right, your suggestion of kind of tenants, letting them kind of pull Yes, there's other constituents in the ecosystem who could be catalysts. We have considered a lot of those, and I think we'll just be very deliberate about rolling those out for them to have a superb experience. And I think that's what's you know, on the horizon for us.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Peter, what can this community do for you? You've been very generous with your time and knowledge. I loved our conversation, but yeah, anything we can do for you?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I mean, I would say, you know, share your questions, share your victories, share, you know, into this community. I think you've got a lot of people here who are kind of rooting for your success, and there is so much here in the, I say broadly, in the kind of climate space. You know, you can tell I'm passionate about energy and buildings, and that's a whole world in itself, but there are many other spaces. So I think if there's something that really kind of pulls on your personal passion, like that's where there's probably going to be the most gravity for you. And so encourage you to, you know, follow that instinct.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you. I'm glad you're safe. The earthquake didn't cause too much trouble. And again, thank you so much for your time. And I will see everybody on October 12th, hopefully for the next one.
Right. Thanks,
Take
Glenn.
care.